Thank you, Senator Carper, for calling today's hearing. I want to thank Senators Heinrich and Blunt for attending, along with our witnesses, and I look forward to hearing from each of you. I appreciate that the Association of Zoos and Aquariums is represented today. Just recently, I toured the Oglebay Good Zoo in Wheeling, West Virginia, which is accredited by the AZA. The Good Zoo houses 20 species. I didn't realize this until I actually saw it with my own eyes. The Good Zoo houses 20 species that are deemed rare or endangered, and its staff is doing valuable work on research to inform conservation of these animals. Speaking of zoos here in Washington, the administration, and did you get that? Okay. The administration and Congress should pursue bipartisan policies to preserve our nation's public lands, wildlife, and ecosystems, our environment, our natural resources, and access for sportsmen are legacies we've been entrusted with safeguarding for future generations of Americans. So today's hearing is focused on the legislation that has been introduced by Senators Heinrich and Blunt, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and I thank them for their advocacy. The bill has broad support from both sides of the aisle, as well as support from the stakeholder community, including hunters and anglers, conservation organizations, and industry. I'm eager to learn more about the legislation through today's hearing. As I understand it, the goal of Recovering America's Wildlife Act is to provide funding to states to cover conservation efforts that will recover species, as well as prevent listing additional species under the Endangered Species Act. As part of this discussion today, I want to emphasize for me the importance of state-driven conservation. Conservation is most effective when led by state and local entities in cooperation with voluntary efforts by private landowners. These are the people that know their habitats, their communities, and their local economies the best. Recovering America's Wildlife Act provides each state the flexibility to tailor their conservation strategies to meet its specific needs. West Virginia is home to 1,233 species of greatest conservation need. I don't know if I'm included in one of those, but I might be. With state-driven efforts, the unique needs of each of these species can be addressed through conservation efforts that will help recover declining populations. As I do when I evaluate legislation under consideration by this committee, my focus will continue to be providing states with the flexibility to address their unique needs and circumstances. As introduced, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act relies on revenue collected from environmental-related violations and enforcement actions to help address its cost. As I understand it, the bill will result in $14 billion in direct mandatory spending over a 10-year period. I think this is an issue, and Senator Carper mentioned this, that we need to consider against the background of the growth of our debt and deficit during this pandemic, and in light of the $4 trillion package that has been recently introduced and is under consideration. We also need to consider how effective any new conservation efforts will be if the administration continues to pursue its rollback of sensible ESA regulations, which may serve to actually undermine investments in conservation. In particular, I'm deeply concerned with Fish and Wildlife's revisiting of changes needed made to the implementation of ESA under the previous administration. These rollbacks will set us back in achieving our conservation goals by increasing costs and burdens of doing the right thing. Specifically, the decision to rescind the 2020 regulation defining the term habitat for purposes of designating critical habitat under ESA. Leaving habitat undefined creates uncertainty for private landowners on whom species recovery absolutely depends. In any discussion of conservation, I think it's important to address common sense reforms for ESA. Cooperation with states and landowners is key for species recovery. Under the ESA, we should ensure that we balance the interests of Americans and their livelihoods with protecting species facing population decline. I look forward to the discussion today on proactive wildlife and habitat conservation solutions, and I thank you again for holding this hearing.